really appreciate it. Anybody who tunes into the YouTube videos afterwards, we really appreciate it. We are going to get right in here because we did quite a good bit last time we were on. This time we are going to hop into George Papadopoulos. So this is another part here. So this is part 2 of this section of part 4 of the document, 88 of the PDF, page 80 of the document. So a lot going on there, but here we are starting with George Papadopoulos for those following along. George Papadopoulos was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign from March 2016 to early October 2016. In late April 2016, Papadopoulos was told by London-based professor Joseph Mifsud, immediately after Mifsud's return from a trip to Moscow, that the Russian government had obtained, quote, dirt, unquote, on candidate Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. 1 week later, on May 6, 2016, Papadopoulos suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to candidate Clinton. Papadopoulos shared information about Russian, quote, dirt, unquote, with people outside of the campaign, and the office investigated whether he also provided it to a campaign official. Papadopoulos and the campaign officials with whom he interacted told the office that they did not recall that Papadopoulos passed them the information. Throughout the relevant period of time, and for several months thereafter, Papadopoulos worked with Mifsud and 2 Russian nationals to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government. That meeting never came to pass. Well, subsection A of the Papadopoulos part 2 of part 4. Gotta love these documents. Origins of campaign work. And remember, they made very clear at the start that they included the things that they could prove, and then they included some other things that they couldn't prove. So they tried to include things that only they could prove with solid evidence. That's why this came to say that there was no direct working between the two, but so much malfeasance was found. I think that's the biggest thing to remember from this. How many indictments, how many people pled guilty, that sort of thing. How many people got pardons off of this is really important to remember, especially when they were so careful going through this in order to not step over the line. So remember that as we kind of go through this, that they only ever included things that they could establish beyond a reasonable doubt. Or the standard of proof they were using here. In March 2016, Papadopoulos became a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. As early as the summer of 2015, he had sought a role as a policy advisor to the campaign, but in a September 30th, 2015 email, he was told that the campaign was not hiring policy advisors. In late 2015, Papadopoulos obtained a paid position on the campaign of Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson. Although Carson remained in the presidential race until early March 2016, Papadopoulos had stopped actively working for his campaign by early February 2016. At that time, Papadopoulos reached out to a contact at the London Centre of International Law Practice, LCILP, which billed itself as a, quote, unique institution comprising high-level professional international law practitioners dedicated to the advancement of global legal knowledge and the practice of international law, end quote. Papadopoulos said that he had finished his role with the Carson campaign, and he asked if LCILP was hiring. In early February, Papadopoulos agreed to join LCILP and arrived in London to begin work. As he was taking his position at LCILP, Papadopoulos contacted Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski via LinkedIn and emailed campaign official Michael Glassner about his interest in joining the Trump campaign. On March 2nd, 2016, Papadopoulos sent Glassner another message reiterating his interest. Glassner passed along word of Papadopoulos' interest to another campaign official, Joy Lutz, who notified Papadopoulos by email that she had been told by Glassner to introduce Papadopoulos, sorry, that was the first mess up, but it's a goofy one, to Sam Clovis, the Trump campaign's national co-chair and chief policy advisor. At the time of Papadopoulos' March 2nd email, the media was criticizing the Trump campaign for lack of experienced foreign policy and national security advisors within its ranks. To address that issue, Senior campaign officials asked Clovis to put a foreign policy team together on short notice. After receiving Papadopoulos's name from Lutz, Clovis performed a Google search on Papadopoulos, learned that he had worked at the Hudson Institute, and believed that he had credibility on energy issues. On March 3, 2016, Clovis arranged to speak with Papadopoulos by phone to discuss Papadopoulos joining the campaign as a foreign policy advisor, and on March 6, 2016, the two spoke. Papadopoulos recalled that Russia was mentioned as a topic, and he understood from the conversation that Russia would be an important aspect of the campaign's foreign policy. At the end of the conversation, Clovis offered Papadopoulos a role as a foreign policy advisor to the campaign, and Papadopoulos accepted the office. The offer. Mix those two up. Part B of the section. Initial Russia-related contacts. Approximately a week after signing on as a foreign policy advisor, Papadopoulos traveled to Rome, Italy, as a part of his duties with LCILP. The purpose of the trip was to meet with officials affiliated with Link Campus University, for a for-profit institution headed by a former Italian government official. During the visit, Papadopoulos was introduced to Joseph Mifsud. Mifsud is a Maltese national who worked as a professor at the London Academy of Diplomacy in London, England. Although Mifsud worked out of London and was also affiliated with LCILP, the encounter in Rome was the first that Papadopoulos met him. Mifsud maintained various Russian contacts while living in Rome, as described further below. Among his contacts was Redacted, a one-time employee of the IRA, the entity that carried out the Russian social media campaign. In January and February of 2016, Mifsud and Redacted discussed Redacted possibly meeting in Russia. The investigation did not identify evidence of them meeting. Later in the spring of 2016, Redacted was also in contact, Redacted, that was linked to an employee of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and that account had overlapping contacts with a group of Russian military-controlled Facebook accounts that included accounts used to promote the DC Leaks releases in the course of the GRU's hack and release operations. See other parts, and it's referencing parts above. There's a decent bit that's redacted, and I wonder if there's anything to this. Again, one of the themes of the channel is no aim assist, so we do a lot of this ourselves. So I'm going to have to look into this myself. But I wonder if there's a way, by looking into this or looking into things that happened after, if we know more, because some people do that. You know, if there's a redacted or if they're trying to hide the names, or I shouldn't say hide suggests nefariousness when I don't necessarily mean it. The idea that you can redact some information but still have it be legible to somebody, or the point get across to somebody, because we can see most of it and they wanted to get across, but I wonder if you can just see right through it to the trained eye, if they can say, oh yeah, the way you see the way that they redacted this here, this wording afterwards, because it kind of seems like that at the very end there, that last one. Later in the spring of 2016, Redacted was also in contact, Redacted, that was linked to an employee, and it's like, does that mean it's not an individual, it's a company? I don't know. I wouldn't be able to say off this, and I think it would be improper to do so. But I wonder if there are people who do that, because with certain documents that I have seen, like co-conspirator 1, 2, and 3, you can just go and somebody's like, oh, you can tell from these interactions and these things that have been released that co-conspirator 1 was Rudy Giuliani. You know, that's what it was in the Jack Smith report, or stuff like that. You know, John Eastman or Rudy Giuliani, or, you know, these crooks, these absolute, you know, bastards, cowards, whatever you want to say. But these people who tried to overthrow the government, they are visible even through the DOJ's ability or attempts to keep their information private or their names out of it. I guess there's no way to perfectly do it, but I wonder if somebody's done the same for this document. According to Papadopoulos, Mifsud at first seemed uninterested in Papadopoulos when they met in Rome. After Papadopoulos informed Mifsud about his role in the Trump campaign, however, Mifsud appeared to take greater interest in Papadopoulos. The two discussed Mifsud's European and Russian contacts and had general discussion about Russia. Mifsud also offered to introduce Papadopoulos to European leaders and others with contacts to the Russian government. Papadopoulos told the office that Mifsud's claim of substantial connections with Russian government officials interested Papadopoulos, who thought that such connections could increase his importance as a policy advisor to the Trump campaign. On March 17, 2016, Papadopoulos returned to London. 4 days later, candidate Trump publicly named him as a member of the Foreign Policy and National Security Advisory Team, chaired by Senator Jeff Sessions. It's so hilarious to see Jeff Sessions talked about now, like after everything. He's one of those early ones that stood up. But it's so funny to just hear him like, oh yeah, he was talked about positively by Trump. It's crazy. We'll just reread that sentence because I stopped there. It's just crazy seeing like Jeff Sessions in here and positive. 4 days later, candidate Trump publicly named him as a member of a Foreign Policy and National Security Advisory Team chaired by Senator Jeff Sessions, describing Papadopoulos as, quote, an oil and energy consultant, end quote, and, quote, an excellent guy, end quote, or, and, quote, excellent guy, end quote. On March 24th, 2016, Papadopoulos met with Mifsud in London. Mifsud was accompanied by a Russian female named Olga I just don't care about these people named Polanskaya. Mifsud introduced Polanskaya as a former student of his who had connections to Vladimir Putin. Papadopoulos understood at the time that Polanskaya, again, I just don't care about these people's names, may have been Putin's niece, but later learned that was not true. During the meeting, Polanskaya offered to help Papadopoulos establish contacts in Russia and stated that the Russian ambassador in London was a friend of hers. Based on this interaction, Papadopoulos expected Mifsud and Polanskaya to introduce him to the Russian ambassador in London, but that did not occur. Following his meeting with Mifsud, Papadopoulos sent an email to members of the Trump campaign's Foreign Policy Advisory Team. The subject line of the message was, quote, meeting with Russian leadership, including Putin, end quote. The message stated in the pertinent part, and this is quoting the email, I just finished a very productive lunch with a good friend of mine, Joseph Mifsud, the director of the London Academy of Diplomacy, who introduced me to both Putin's niece and the Russian ambassador in London, who also acts as the deputy foreign minister. The topic of the lunch was to arrange a meeting between us and the Russian leadership to discuss U.S.-Russian ties under President Trump. They are keen to host us in a, quote, neutral, end quote, city or directly in Moscow. They said the leadership, including Putin, is ready to meet with us and Mr. Trump should there be interest. Waiting for everyone's thoughts on moving forward with this very important issue. Papadopoulos' message came at a time when Clovis perceived a shift in the campaign's approach toward Russia, from one of engaging with Russia through the NATO framework and taking a strong stance on Russian aggression in Ukraine, to heavily redacted. That's very interesting. Clovis's response to Papadopoulos, however, did not reflect that shift. Replying to Papadopoulos and the other members of the Foreign Policy Advisory Team copied on the initial email, Clovis wrote, this is most informative. Let me work it through the campaign. No commitments until we see how this plays out. My thought is that we probably should not go forward with any meetings with the Russians until we have had occasion to sit with our NATO allies, especially France, Germany, and Great Britain. We need to reassure our allies that we are not going to advance anything with Russia until we have everyone on the same page. More thoughts later today. Great work. Man, it's kind of crazy reading this stuff afterwards. Now that they're super pro-Russia. Part C of this part. March 31st, Foreign Policy Team meeting. The campaign held a meeting of the Foreign Policy Advisory Team with Senator Sessions and candidate Trump approximately 1 week later on March 31st, 2016 in Washington, D.C. The meeting, which was intended to generate press coverage for the campaign, took place at the Trump International Hotel. Papadopoulos flew to Washington for the event. At the meeting, Senator Sessions sat at one end of the oval table while Trump sat at the other. As reflected in the photograph below, which was posted to Trump's Instagram account, Papadopoulos sat between the two seats to Sessions' left. So that's Papadopoulos right there. Don't know who that is, but that's Papadopoulos because that's Sessions right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's George Papadopoulos. During the meeting, each of the newly announced foreign policy advisors introduced themselves and briefly described their areas of experience or expertise. Papadopoulos spoke about his previous work in the energy sector and then brought up a potential meeting with Russian officials. Specifically, Papadopoulos told the group that he had learned through his contacts in London that Putin wanted to meet with candidate Trump and that these connections could help arrange that meeting. Trump and Sessions both reacted to Papadopoulos' statement. Papadopoulos and campaign advisor J.D. Gordon, who told investigators in an interview that he had a, quote, crystal clear, end quote, recollection of the meeting, have stated that Trump was interested in and receptive to the idea of a meeting with Putin. Papadopoulos understood Sessions to be similarly supportive of his efforts to arrange a meeting. Gordon and 2 other attendees, however, recall that Sessions generally opposed the proposal, though they differ in their accounts of the concerns he voiced or the strength of the opposition he expressed. Part D, George Papadopoulos learns that Russia has, quote, dirt, end quote, in the form of Clinton emails. Whatever Sessions' precise words at the March 31st meeting, Papadopoulos did not understand Sessions or anyone else in the Trump campaign to have directed that he refrain from making further efforts to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government. To the contrary, Papadopoulos told the office that he understood the campaign to be supportive of his efforts to arrange such a meeting. Accordingly, when he returned to London, Papadopoulos resumed those efforts. Throughout April 2016, Papadopoulos continued to correspond with, meet with, and seek Russian contacts. Through Mifsud and, at times, Polonskankia. I don't care. For example, within a week of her initial March 24th meeting with him, Polonskankia attempted to send Papadopoulos a text message, which email exchanges show to have been drafted or edited by Mifsud, addressing Papadopoulos', quote, wish to engage with the Foreign Federation, end quote, when Papadopoulos learned from Mifsud that Polonskankia had tried to message him, he sent her an email seeking another meeting. Polonskankia responded the next day that she was, quote, back in St. Petersburg, end quote, but, quote, would be very pleased to support Papadopoulos' initiatives between our 2 countries, end quote, and, quote, to meet him again, end quote. Papadopoulos stated in reply that he thought, quote, a good step, end quote, would be to introduce him to, quote, the Russian ambassador in London, end quote, and that he would like to talk to the ambassador, quote, or anyone else you recommend about a potential foreign policy trip to Russia, end quote. Mifsud, who had been copied on the email exchanges, replied on the morning of April 11th, 2016. He wrote, quote, this is already been agreed. I am flying to Moscow on the 18th for a Valdai, VALDAI, for anybody who knows, meeting, plus other meetings at the Duma. We will talk tomorrow, end quote. The 2 bodies referenced by Mifsud are part of or associated with the Russian government. The Duma is a Russian legislative assembly, while, quote, Valdai, end quote, refers to the Valdai Discussion Club, a Moscow-based group that is, quote, close to Russia's foreign policy establishment, end quote. So just 2 para-government, not paramilitary. Papadopoulos thanked Mifsud and said that he would see him, quote, tomorrow, end quote. For her part, Polonskankia responded that she had, quote, already alerted my personal links to our conversations and your requests, end quote, that, quote, we are all very excited at the possibility of a good relationship with Mr. Trump, end quote, and that, quote, the Russian Federation would love to welcome him once his candidature would be officially announced. Candidacy? You never know with these people. Papadopoulos's and Mifsud's mentions of seeing each other, quote, tomorrow, end quote, referenced a meeting that the 2 had scheduled for the next morning, April 12th, 2016, at the Andes Hotel in London. Papadopoulos acknowledged the meeting during interviews with the office, and records from Papadopoulos' UK cell phone and his internet search history all indicate that the meeting took place. Following the meeting, Mifsud traveled, as planned, to Moscow. On April 18, 2016, while in Russia, Mifsud introduced Papadopoulos over email to Ivan Timofeyev, a member of the Russian International Affairs Council, RIAC. Mifsud had described Timofeyev as having connections with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the MFA, the executive entity in Russia responsible for Russian foreign relations. Over the next several weeks, Papadopoulos and Timofeyev had multiple conversations over Skype and email about setting, quote, the groundwork, end quote, for a, quote, potential, end quote, meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials. Papadopoulos told the office that, on one Skype call, he believed that this conversation with Timofeyev was being monitored or supervised by an unknown third party because Timofeyev spoke in an official manner and Papadopoulos heard odd noises on the line. Timofeyev also told Papadopoulos in an April 25, 2016 email that he had just spoken, quote, to Igor Ivanov, the president of RIAC and former foreign minister of Russia, end quote, and conveyed Ivanov's advice on how to best arrange a, quote, Moscow visit, end quote. After a stop in Rome, Mifsud returned to England on April 25, 2016. The next day, Papadopoulos met Mifsud for breakfast at the Andes Hotel, the same location of their last meeting. During that meeting, Mifsud told Papadopoulos that he had met with high-level Russian government officials during his recent trip to Moscow. Mifsud also said that, on the trip, he learned that the Russians had obtained, quote, dirt, end quote, on candidate Hillary Clinton. As Papadopoulos later stated to the FBI, Mifsud said that the, quote, dirt, end quote, was in the form of, quote, emails of Clinton, end quote, and that they, quote, have thousands of emails, end quote. On May 6, 2016, 10 days after that meeting with Mifsud, Papadopoulos suggested to be a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. Damn. Remember, nothing happened, though. Don't look here. Part E. Russian-related communications with the campaign. While he was discussing with his foreign contacts a potential meeting of campaign officials with Russian government officials, Papadopoulos kept campaign officials apprised of his efforts. On April 25, 2016, the day before Mifsud told Papadopoulos about the emails, Papadopoulos wrote to senior policy advisor Stephen Miller that, quote, the Russian government has an open invitation by Putin for Mr. Trump to meet him when he is ready, end quote, and that, quote, the advantage of being in London is that the governments tend to speak a bit more openly in another, quote, neutral, and that, quote, cities, end all quotes. On April 27, 2016, after his meeting with Mifsud, Papadopoulos wrote a second message to Miller stating that, quote, some interesting messages were coming in from Moscow about a trip when the time is right, end quote. The same day, Papadopoulos sent a similar email to campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, telling Lewandowski that Papadopoulos had, quote, been receiving a lot of calls over the last month about Putin wanting to host Trump and the team when the time is right, end quote. So remember, Stephen Miller, who's involved with the campaign now and was involved with the campaign before. So these people, if they ever say, oh, well, I don't know anything about the Russia, I don't know anything, you were told about it by email. Like there's no emails that the DOJ found and were able to link you to say that you were apprised of meetings with Russia. You're going to say it was nothing. Oh, there's nothing to look at. But remember, the standards are completely different for the two sides. So yes, if you look at everything that every Democrat does in a terrible light, most things will look terrible. And yes, if you look at everything that this group of people you want to do, whatever you call them, I call them maggots, but whatever you want to call them, if you look at everything in a positive light, it's very easy to write some of this stuff off as normal. It's not really that normal. This kind of sounds crazy, and I feel like if people knew this was even a thing, was even in the background, they would change their tune. But I don't know. I don't know that for a fact. Papadopoulos' Russia-related communications with campaign officials continued throughout the spring and summer of 2016. On May 4, 2016, he forwarded to Lewandowski an email from Timofeyev raising the possibility of a meeting in Moscow, asking Lewandowski whether that was, quote, something we want to move forward with, end quote. The next day, Papadopoulos forwarded the same Timofeev email to Sam Clovis, adding to the top of the email, quote, Russia update, end quote. He included the same email in a May 21st, 2016 message to senior campaign official Paul Manafort under the subject line, quote, request from Russia to meet Mr. Trump, end quote, stating that, quote, Russia has been eager to meet Mr. Trump for quite some time and have been reaching out to me to discuss, end quote. Manafort forwarded the message to another campaign official without including Papadopoulos and stated, quote, let's discuss. We need someone to communicate that Trump is not doing these trips. It should be someone low level in the campaign so as not to send any signal, end quote. On June 1st, 2016, Papadopoulos replied to another email chain with Lewandowski about the Russia visit, asking if Lewandowski, quote, wanted to have a call about this topic, end quote, and whether, quote, we were following up on it, end quote. After Lewandowski told Papadopoulos to, quote, connect with, end quote, Clovis because he was, quote, running point, end quote, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that, quote, the Russia MFA, end quote, was asking him, quote, if Mr. Trump is interested in visiting Russia at some point, end quote. Papadopoulos wrote in an email that he, quote, wanted to pass this info along to you for you to decide what's best to do with it and what message I should send or to ignore, end quote. After several email and Skype exchanges with Timofeev, Papadopoulos sent one more email to Lewandowski on June 19, 2016, Lewandowski's last day as campaign manager. The email stated that, quote, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, end quote, had contacted him and asked whether, if Mr. Trump could not travel to Russia, a campaign representative such as Papadopoulos could attend meetings. Papadopoulos told Lewandowski that he was, quote, willing to make the trip off the record if it's in the interest of Mr. Trump and the campaign to meet specific people, end quote. Following Lewandowski's departure from the campaign, Papadopoulos communicated with Clovis and Walid Fairs, another member of the Foreign Policy Advisory Team, about an off-the-record meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials or with Papadopoulos' other Russian contacts, Mifsud and Timofeev. Papadopoulos also interacted directly with Clovis and Fairs in connection with the summit of the Transatlantic Parliamentary Group on Counterterrorism, also known as TAG, a group for which Fairs was co-secretary general. So from the bit before, just reading through this to make sure there's nothing crazy. First, these are just the notes in the bottom. First, on May 15th, distant relative of the then Trump Organization lawyer Jason Greenblatt emailed Clovis about a potential campaign meeting between Lazar, the chief rabbi of Russia. The email stated that Klein had connected Lazar in February about a possible Trump-Putin meeting, was, quote, a very close confidant of Putin. The investigation did not find evidence that Clovis responded to Klein's email or that further context of significance came out of Klein's subsequent meeting with Greenblatt or Rabbi Lazar at Trump Tower. So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of meetings, but we just don't have proof of this, don't have proof of that. You love to see it. On July 16, 2016, Papadopoulos attended the TAG summit in Washington, D.C., where he sat next to Clovis, as reflected in the picture below. So that fat fuck must be Clovis. Although Clovis claimed to have no recollection of attending the TAG summit, Papadopoulos remembered discussing Russia and a foreign policy trip with Clovis and Fairs during the event. Papadopoulos' recollection is consistent with emails sent before and after the TAG summit. The pre-summit messages included a July 11, 2016 email in which Fairs suggested meeting Papadopoulos the day after the summit to chat, and a July 12th message in the same chain in which Fairs advised Papadopoulos that other summit attendees, quote, are very nervous about Russia, so be aware, end quote. 10 days after the summit, Papadopoulos sent an email to Mifsud listing Fairs and Clovis as other, quote, participants, end quote, in potential meeting at the London Academy of Diplomacy. Finally, Papadopoulos' reflection is also consistent with handwritten notes from a journal that he kept at the time. Those notes, which are reprinted in part below, appear to refer to a potential September 2016 meetings in London with representatives of the office of the, quote, office of Putin, end quote, and suggest that Fairs, Clovis, Papadopoulos, quote, Walid /Sam, me, end quote, would attend without the official backing of the campaign. Quote, no official letter, no message from Trump, end quote. Has all his messages down here, a bunch of scrabbles. Later, communications indicate that Clovis determined that he could not travel. He, Clovis. On August 15, 2016, Papadopoulos emailed Clovis that he had received requests from multiple foreign governments, quote, even Russia, end quote, for, quote, closed-door workshop consultations abroad, end quote, and asked whether there was still interest for Clovis, Fairs, and Papadopoulos, quote, to go on that trip, end quote. Clovis copied Fairs on his response, which said that he could not, quote, travel before the election, end quote, but that he, quote, would encourage Papadopoulos and Walid to make the trips if it is feasible, end quote. Papadopoulos was dismissed from the Trump campaign in early October 2016 after an interview he gave to the Russian news agency Interfax generated adverse publicity. So as always, it's fine to do a bunch of shit, just don't get caught or we'll throw you out and blame it on you. Papadopoulos, it sounds like a goat name. A little scapegoat. Part F, Trump campaign knowledge of, quote, dirt. Papadopoulos admitted telling at least one individual outside of the campaign, specifically the then Greek foreign minister, about Russia's obtaining Clinton-related emails. In addition to a different foreign government informed the FBI that 10 days after meeting with Mifsud in late April 2016, Papadopoulos suggested that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. This conversation occurred after the GRU spearfished Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta and stole his emails, and the GRU hacked into the DCCC and the DNC. Such disclosures raised questions about whether Papadopoulos informed any Trump campaign official about the emails. When interviewed, Papadopoulos and the campaign officials who interacted with him told the office that they could not recall Papadopoulos sharing the information that Russia had obtained, quote, dirt, end quote, on candidate Clinton in the form of emails, or that Russia could assist the campaign through the release of information about Clinton. Papadopoulos stated that he could not clearly recall having told anyone on the campaign and wavered about whether he accurately remembered an incident in which Clovis had been upset after hearing Papadopoulos tell Clovis that Papadopoulos thought, quote, they have her emails, end quote. The campaign officials who interacted or corresponded with Papadopoulos have similarly stated with varying degrees of certainty that he did not tell them. Senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, for example, did not remember hearing anything from Papadopoulos or Clovis about Russia having emails of or dirt on candidate Clinton. Woof, that was a doozy. Clovis stated that he did not recall anyone, including Papadopoulos, having given him non-public information that a foreign government might be in possession of material damaging to Hillary Clinton. Heavily redacted for a jury. I think, now that I'm thinking back to it, is this all the Roger Stone parts? Because didn't Roger Stone have to go before a grand jury? Wasn't that like a thing? And then he pled the fifth or something like that, and then they held him contempt. Is that like a thing? I feel like it's either Roger Stone or it's Paul Manafort, because these are the people that charges got brought against, I believe. So I imagine that's what these grand jury redacted ones are for. No documentary, and this is after the heavily redacted, no documentary evidence and nothing in the email accounts or other communication facilities reviewed by the office shows that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. So they just covered their tracks. This is kind of what that sounds like to me. Part G. Additional George Papadopoulos contact. The office investigated another Russia-related contact with Papadopoulos. The office was not fully able to explore the contact because the individual at issue, Sergei Milian, remained out of the country since the inception of our investigation and declined to meet with members of the office despite our repeated efforts to obtain an interview. Papadopoulos first connected with Milian via LinkedIn on July 15, 2016, shortly after Papadopoulos had attended the TAG summit with Clovis. Milian, an American citizen who is a native of Belarus, introduced himself, quote, as president of the New York-based Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, end quote, and claimed that through that position he had, quote, insider knowledge and direct access to the top hierarchy in Russian politics, end quote. Papadopoulos asked Timofeev whether he had heard of Millian. Although Timofeev said no, Papadopoulos met Millian in New York City. The meetings took place on July 30th and August 1st of 2016. Afterwards, Millian invited Papadopoulos to attend and potentially speak at 2 international energy conferences, including one that was to be held in Moscow in September 2016. Papadopoulos ultimately did not attend either conference. It's kind of weird how they're supposed to be buddy-buddy, but they never go to the conference. It's like they know they're covering their tracks. They know they're doing something wrong. That's why this all reeks to high heaven. On July 31st, 2016, following his first in-person meeting with Millian, Papadopoulos emailed Trump campaign official Bo Denisic, I'm close enough, to say that he had been contacted, quote, by some leaders of Russian-American voters here in the U.S. about their interest in voting for Mr. Trump, end quote, and to ask whether he should, quote, put you in touch with their group, U.S.-Russia Chamber of Commerce, end quote. Denisic thanked Papadopoulos, quote, for taking the initiative, end quote, but asked him to, quote, hold off with outreach to Russian Americans, end quote, because, quote, too many articles, end quote, had portrayed the campaign chairman Manafort and candidate Trump as, quote, being pro-Russian. Yeah, stop doing that. He's too pro-Russian. Ooh, I wonder how we got here. We're gonna take that because they know what they're doing. I know the Supreme Court says you're not allowed to look at things like someone's state of mind, like why they would commit a crime. I know you're not supposed to talk about it, but here we are, we're talking about it. What are they going to do? On August 23rd, 2016, Millian sent a Facebook message to Papadopoulos promising that he would, quote, share with you a disruptive technology that might be instrumental in your political work for the campaign, end quote. Papadopoulos claimed to have no recollection of this matter. On November 9th, 2016, shortly after the election, Papadopoulos arranged to meet with Millian in Chicago to discuss business opportunities, including potential work with Russian, quote, billionaires who are not under sanctions, end quote. The meeting took place on November 14th, 2016, at the Trump Hotel and Tower in Chicago. According to Papadopoulos, the two men discussed partnering on business deals, but Papadopoulos perceived that Millian's attitude toward him changed when Papadopoulos stated that he was only pursuing private sector opportunities and was not interested in a job in the administration. The two remained in contact, however, and had extended online discussions about possible business opportunities in Russia. The two also arranged to meet at a Washington, D.C. bar when both attended Trump's inauguration in late January 2017. Number 3, we are on to the next one, Carter Page. Carter Page worked for the Trump campaign from January 2016 to September 2016. He was formally and publicly announced as a foreign policy advisor by the candidate in March 2016. Page had lived and worked in Russia and had been approached by Russian intelligence officers several years before he volunteered for the Trump campaign. During his time with the campaign, Page advocated pro-Russia foreign policy positions and traveled to Moscow in his personal capacity. Russian intelligence officials had formed relationships with Page in 2008 and 2013, and Russian officials may have focused on Page in 2016 because of his affiliation with the campaign. However, the investigation did not establish that Page coordinated with the Russian government in its efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. So this is the stuff that kind of gets me. Is like, I shouldn't, breathe into the mic. I apologize for all those people that I just breathe into the mic for. But seriously, it does bug me that this person that we know has been working with Russians in the past is involved in the campaign, and this never raised an eyebrow. You know, this may be a little bit more seasoned operator who got caught twice and is now, like, if you tried to explain that to any maggot, to any conservative, to any Republican, whoever the fuck, whatever they want to call themselves, if you try to explain it, like, yeah, you let him get away with it twice, and then now in this one, we don't have hard proof that he did it, but he did work for the bad guys, and he was near the bad guys, and it was the bad guys' territory. they would understand in a heartbeat. If this was a micro level, if this was someone in a town doing a bad thing, they would understand so quickly. But if you take it to this point and you make it, oh, it's about the campaign, it's about a larger thing, it's about, you blow it up a little bit, suddenly all that goes out the window. Oh, our guy was involved? Russia. We will accept that. Even though, no, this guy had worked with Russia before. Like, this is a whole thing. This individual multiple times had been caught. You would just never accept this. That's probably my biggest part with it, is if it was Joe Biden, if it was Kamala Harris, and you found out just this paragraph, but about them, it would be enough. They would know, oh, this is probably a little sketchy. Because there's something that the Supreme Court doesn't care about anymore, and I think we need to get back to it. You shouldn't have even the appearance of impropriety. It shouldn't even look like you've been compromised. It shouldn't even appear to be. And there's an argument to be made that if you get too, active with that and you start throwing people out, there's this McCarthyism, you make a random assertion with no evidence and claim that someone's a commie and then they get thrown out. It shouldn't be that bad. It shouldn't be, so crazy. But my goodness, we got to have something better than what we got now, because the inability to challenge this stuff, you should be able to say that this is a little bit wild. This affiliation, this level of affiliation, and then so many other red flags. Yeah, this person probably just got better at hiding. That's it. It's that simple. So silly. All right, part A for Carter Page, background. Before he began working for the campaign in January 2016, Page had substantial prior experience studying Russian policy issues and living and working in Moscow. From 2004 to 2007, Page was the deputy branch manager of Merrill Lynch's Moscow office. There, he worked on transactions involving the Russian energy company Gazprom and came to know Gazprom's deputy chief financial officer, Sergei Yatsenko. This just reeks. In 2008, Page founded Global Energy Capital, LLC, GEC, an investment management and advisory firm focused on the energy sector in emerging markets. Redacted. The company otherwise had no sources of income, and Page was forced to draw down his life savings to support himself and pursue his business venture. Page asked Yatsenko to work with him at GEC as a senior advisor on a contingency basis, redacted for grand jury. It sounds like this person with ties to the Russian government who had been caught working with Russians before. We have this information here. He was formerly during his time with the campaign, advocated for pro-Russian policies. He had formed official, what does that say? Hold on, it'll probably be easier to read it from here. During his time with the campaign, Page advocated pro-Russia foreign policy positions and traveled to Moscow in his personal capacity. Russian intelligence officials had formed relationships with him in 2008 and 2013, and they may have focused on him in 2016 because of his affiliation, but they couldn't find evidence of what they were doing. So they got better at hiding it because they already found out that they knew that we had talked to him in 2008. They knew that we had talked to him in 2013. And it sounds like he was this guy who already has pretty sketchy stuff. He was into them for money. He gave up his life savings because he started a business. It sucks to be him. I really understand. It sucks to be him. He started a business in 2008, and then the fucking world crashes, and everybody takes their money back, so he has to put his life savings into it, and then he talks to some guy in Russia who says, oh yeah, I can get you out of this for a very small fee. I'm going to come to you one day, and I'm going to ask you for a fucking favor. It's so crazy. Like, this is so simple. Anybody with... frustrating. In 2008, Page met Alexander Bulatov, a Russian government official who worked at the Russian consulate in New York. Page later learned that Bulatov was a Russian intelligence officer, heavily redacted. In 2013, Viktor Podobny, another Russian intelligence officer working covertly in the United States under diplomatic cover, formed a relationship with Page. Podobny met Page at an energy symposium in New York City and began exchanging emails with him. Podobny and Page also met in person on multiple occasions, during which Page offered his outlook on the future of the energy industry, and provided documents to Podobny about the energy business. In a recorded conversation on April 8, 2013, Podobny told another intelligence officer that Page was interested in business opportunities in Russia. In Podobny's words, Page, quote, got hooked on Gazprom, thinking that if they have a project he could rise up, maybe he can. It's obvious that he wants to earn lots of money, end quote. Podobny said that he had led Page on by, quote, feeding him empty promises, end quote, that Podobny would use his Russian business connections to help Page. Podobny told the other intelligence officer that his method of recruiting foreign sources was to promise them favors and then discarded them once he obtained relevant information from them. So doesn't that sound like... And they knew they were recorded for this one, at least it sounds like. Because it sounds like they're talking in code even when they're doing this. He wants to earn lots of money. Yeah, he owes us lots of money is what you mean. In 2015, Podobny and two other Russian intelligence officers were charged with conspiracy to act as an unregistered agent of a foreign government. The criminal complaint detailed Podobny's interactions with and conversations about Page, who was identified only as, quote, male one, end quote. Based on the criminal complaints Based on the criminal complaints description of the interactions, Page was aware that he was the individual described as, quote, male one, end quote. Page later spoke with the Russian government official at the United Nations General Assembly and identified himself so that the official would understand he was, quote, male one, end quote, from the Podobny complaint. Page told the officials that he, quote, didn't do anything, end quote. In interviews with the FBI before the office's opening, Page acknowledged that he understood that the individuals he had associated with were members of the Russian intelligence services, but he stated that he had only provided immaterial non-public information to them and that he did not view this relationship as a back channel. Page told investigating agents that, quote, the more immaterial non-public information I give them, the better for this country, end quote. Man, that's really cool that you get to make that decision and we don't have like laws on that. Oh, wait, we do. B, origins of and early campaign work. In January 2016, Page began volunteering on an informal, unpaid basis for the Trump campaign after Ed Cox, a state Republican Party official, introduced Page to the Trump campaign officials. Page told the office that his goal in working on the campaign was to help Candidate Trump improve relations with Russia. To that end, Page emailed campaign officials offering his thoughts on U.S.-Russia relations, prepared talking points and briefing memos on Russia, and proposed that candidate Trump meet with President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. In communications with campaign officials, Page also reportedly touted his high-level contacts in Russia and his ability to forge connections between candidate Trump and senior Russian government officials. For example, on January 30th, 2016, Page sent an email to senior campaign officials stating that he had, quote, spent the past week in Europe and had been in discussions with some individuals with close ties to the Kremlin, end quote, who recognized that Trump could have, quote, game-changing effect in bringing the end of the new Cold War, end quote. The email stated that, quote, though through his discussions with these high-level contacts, end quote, Page believed that, quote, a direct meeting in Moscow between Mr. Trump and Putin could be arranged, end quote. Page closed the email by criticizing U.S. sanctions on Russia, and then redacted. On March 21st, 2016, candidate Trump formally and publicly identified Page as a member of his foreign policy team to advise on Russia and the energy sector. Over the next several months, Page continued providing policy-related work product to campaign officials. For example, in April 2016, Page provided feedback on an outline for a foreign policy speech that the candidate gave at the Mayflower Hotel. In May 16, 2016, Page prepared an outline of an energy policy speech for the campaign, then traveled to Bismarck, North Dakota, to watch the candidate deliver the speech. Chief Policy Advisor Sam Clovis expressed appreciation for Page's work and praised his work to other campaign officials. Part C. Carter Page's July 2016 trip to Moscow. Page's affiliation with the Trump campaign took on a higher profile and drew the attention of Russian officials after the candidate named him a foreign policy advisor. As a result, in late April 2016, Page was invited to give a speech at the July 2016 commencement ceremony at the new economics school NES in Moscow. The NES commencement ceremony generally featured high-profile speakers. For example, President Barack Obama delivered a commencement address at the school in 2009. NES officials told the office that the interest in inviting Page to speak at NES was based entirely on his status as a Trump campaign advisor who served as the candidate's Russia expert. There we go. Andrei Krikovich, an associate of Page's, an assistant professor at the High School of Economics in Russia, recommended that NES rector Shlomo Weber invite Page to give the commencement address based on his connection to the Trump campaign. Denis Klementov, an employee of NES, said that when Russians learned of Page's involvement in the Trump campaign in March 2016, the excitement was palpable. Weber recalled that in summer 2016, there was substantial interest in the Trump campaign in Moscow, and he felt that bringing a member of the campaign to the school would be beneficial. Woof. Hate those thrown in there. They throw you off so bad. Just scrolling down here, seeing how much more we got. It's going to be a good bit, so we're going to take a break here soon. We're just going to make sure we get to a good stopping point. We're going to finish up on Carter Page here. Shouldn't be too long. I think we're on this page. Yep. Page was eager. Excuse me. Page was eager to accept the invitation to speak at NES, and he sought approval from the Trump campaign officials to make the trip to Russia. On May 16, 2016, while that request was still under consideration, Page emailed Clovis, J.D. Gordon, and Walid Fairs and suggested that candidate Trump take his place speaking at the commencement ceremony in Moscow. On June 19, 2016, Page followed up again to request approval to speak at the NES event and to reiterate that NES, quote, would love to have Mr. Trump speak at the annual celebration, end quote, in Page's place. Campaign manager Corey Lewandowski responded the same day saying, quote, if you want to do this, it would be outside of your role with Donald J. Trump for president campaign. I am certain Mr. Trump will not be able to attend, end quote. In early July 2016, Page traveled to Russia for the NES events. On July 5th, 2016, Denis Klementov, copying his brother Dmitry Klementov, emailed Maria Zakharova, the director of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Information and Press Department, about Page's visit and his connection to the Trump campaign. Denis Klementov said in the email that he wanted to draw the Russian government's attention to Page's visit in Moscow. His message to Zakharova continued, quote, Page is Trump's advisor on foreign policy. He is a known businessman. He used to work in Russia. If you have any issues, I will be happy to help contact him, end quote. Dmitry Klementov then contacted Russia Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov and Page's visit to see if Peskov wanted to introduce Page to any Russian government officials. The following day, Peskov responded to what appears to have been the same Denis Klementov-Zakharova email thread. Peskov wrote, quote, I have read about Page. Specialists say that he is far from being the main one, so I better not initiate a meeting in the Kremlin, end quote. On July 7, 2016, Page delivered the first of two speeches in Moscow at NES. In the speech, Page criticized the U.S. government's foreign policy towards Russia, stating that, quote, Washington and other Western capitals have impeded potential progress through their often hypocritical focus on ideas such as democratization, inequality, corruption, and regime change. On July 8, 2016, Page delivered a speech during the NES commencement. After Page delivered his commencement address, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board members Arkady Dervokovich, I don't fucking care, spoke at the ceremony and stated that the sanctions the U.S. had imposed on Russia had hurt the NES. Page and Dervovich shook hands at the commencement ceremony, and Weber recalled that Dervovich made statements to Page about working together in the future. Page said that, during his time in Moscow, he met with friends and associates he knew from when he lived in Russia, including Andrei Baranov and a former Gazprom employee who had become the head of investors relations at Rosneft, a Russian energy company. Page stated that he and Baranov talked about, quote, immaterial non-public, end quote, information. Page believed he and Baranov discussed Rosneft president Igor Sechin, and he thought Baranov might have mentioned the possibility of a sale of a stake in Reznov in passing. Page recalled mentioning his involvement in the Trump campaign with Baranov, although he did not remember the details of the conversation. Page also met with individuals from Tatneft, a Russian energy company, to discuss possible business deals, including having Page work as a consultant. On July 8, 2016, while he was in Moscow, Page emailed several campaign officials and stated he would send, quote, a readout soon regarding some incredible insights and outreach I've received from a few Russian legislators and senior members of presidential administration here. On July 9, 2016, Page emailed Clovis, writing in pertinent part, quote, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and NES board member Ardeki Dervovich, don't care, also spoke before the event. In a private conversation, Dervovich expressed strong support for Mr. Trump and a desire to work together toward devising better solutions in response to the vast range of current international problems. Based on feedback from a diverse array of other sources close to the presidential administration, it was readily apparent that this sentiment is widely held at all levels of government. Despite these representations to the campaign, super redacted, and then that's the end of the email. The office was unable to obtain additional evidence or testimony about who Page may have met or communicated with in Moscow. Thus, Page's activities in Russia, are, as described in his emails with the campaign, were not fully explained. So yeah, a lot of fucking questions left over. Kind of sketchy that we get to say that this is it's a hoax. It's a witch hunt. Sure are a lot of witches. Part D. Later campaign work and removal from the campaign. In July 2016, after returning from Russia, Page traveled to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. While there, Page met Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. That interaction, as is described in Volume 1, Section 4, Page later emailed campaign officials with feedback he said he received from ambassadors he had met at the convention, and he wrote that Ambassador Kislyak was worried about candidate Clinton's worldviews. Following the convention, Page's trip to Moscow and his advocacy for pro-Russia foreign policy drew the media's attention and began to generate substantial press coverage. The campaign responded by distancing itself from Page, describing him as an, quote, informal foreign policy advisor, end quote, who did, quote, not speak for Mr. Trump or the campaign, end quote, after establishing him as exactly that before. You gotta love it. On September 23rd, 2016, Yahoo News reported that U.S. intelligence officials were investigating whether Page had opened private communications with senior Russian officials to discuss U.S. sanctions policy under a possible Trump administration. A campaign spokesman told Yahoo News that Page had, quote, no role, end quote, in the campaign, and that the campaign was, quote, not aware of any of his activities, past or present, end quote. On September 24th, 2016, Page was formally removed from the campaign. Although Page had been removed from the campaign after the election, he sought a position in the Trump administration. On November 14th, 2016, he submitted an application to the transition team that inflated his credentials and experiences, stating that in his capacity as the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, he had met with, quote, top world leaders, end quote, effectively responded to diplomatic outreach efforts from senior government officials in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas, end quote. Page received no response from the transition team. When Page took a personal trip to Moscow in December 2016, he met again with at least one Russian government official. That interaction and a discussion of the December trip are set forth in Volume 1, Section 4.